Good morning. Louder. I can't hear. It's not good. Loud, loud, loud sing. Okay. So everybody is all excited to learn about wired technologies. So I'll no, that's what I'm trying to say. Where's the enthusiasm? It's still latent. So I'm giving over to Nadeem. I'll not waste time. And all those who don't participate actively get extra questions and extra assignments.
Okay, good morning everyone. That's better. So I think we'll start from where we left yesterday. So yesterday we talked about internet architecture, then we had a discussion on wireless access technologies. So today I'm going to talk about wired access technologies. Primarily I'm covering four commonly used access technologies, which is basically Ethernet, which we all use almost every day. DSL, which is again one of the most commonly deployed wired access technologies. Cable or broadband, which is not used in India, but it's very common outside India. And of course fiber, which is now being deployed in India by many service providers. At least BSNL, MTNL, they've started offering fiber connections to subscribers. So before we go into what are those technologies, so just a brief comparison of how wired is different from wireless. So one of the basic differences is that in a wireless channel, as we saw yesterday, the transmission is always broadcast. So in a sense, the channel is shared across multiple users. So whenever you transmit over Wi-Fi, for example, the transmission is received by all the users who are connected to that Wi-Fi access point. In fact, even if you are not connected, you can still receive the transmission. Whereas in the wired system, there is always a separate channel which is dedicated to each user. So even though the cable may be shared over multiple users, but on the same cable there is a split of bandwidth for multiple different users. The second difference is that in the wired system, the signal attenuation, the rate at which the signal decays is much slower compared to a wireless medium. Because in wireless medium, when the radio waves propagate, they encounter buildings, they encounter vegetation, they encounter all kinds of obstacles. So they attenuate much faster. So you may transmit at some power X, but by the time it reaches the receiver, the power will be much less because of this attenuation. Whereas in the wired systems, there is attenuation. Even if you transmit a signal on a copper cable, there will be a loss of power as the signal progresses with distance. But the amount of attenuation is much less compared to what you see in a wireless system. Third important part is interference. So what I mean by interference is that if you look at a Wi-Fi technology, in Wi-Fi, the channels are adjacent. So you have each channel is a 40 megahertz channel and they are next to each other. So when somebody transmits on 140 megahertz channel, let's say channel 1, the transmission will leak into the adjacent channel. So there is no easy way to reduce or this leakage of power into other channels. So there will always be some adjacent channel interference. So your signal will never be confined to the bandwidth that you are given because whatever filters we use for filtering out the signal, they are all basically linear or non-linear filters. So they will never cut off the waveform at that particular point of time. So what I'm trying to say is that, if I can draw you, that although we assume that our bandwidth is this form, but when we transmit the signal, most of the signal power is constrained within this bandwidth, but there will always be leakage at the edges. You can design filters which can really clip it here, but they will be very, very expensive. So they are very difficult to implement. So what will happen is, if there is another user who is using another channel here, this signal will leak into that user signal. So this adjacent channel interference problem is very acute in wireless systems, which is to some extent not there in wired systems. Even wired systems, there will be interference, but it will be less. The fourth point is that in wireless systems, of course, mobility is given. So you may walk around with your phone or your laptop and you are still connected to the Wi-Fi access point as long as you are within the range of the access point. But in a wired system, you will have, the point of attachment is fixed. I cannot carry over my Ethernet connection wherever I go. So that is one big difference that is there. So of course, there are pros and cons for both, but as we saw yesterday, there are a lot of wireless technologies around. Similarly, in the wired domain, we have a large number of, because wired technology started much before wireless came into the picture. So we have a very rich, set of technologies which have been deployed over the years. So if this figure shows basically at the bottom, you can see the number of wireless technologies that are currently used. So very beginning, we had, these dial-up systems which were running on your telephone lines, which basically you had a dial-up modem by which you could connect to the telephone line. And if you know that telephone signal, the voice signal is 4 kilohertz signal. So the bandwidth occupied by a voice transmission is 4 kilohertz only. So the dial-up systems, what they did is, they use the same 4 kilohertz to transmit data. So 4 kilohertz is nothing, it's very small bandwidth. If you look at Wi-Fi, for example, it uses 40 megahertz. So if you compare the order of magnitude difference, thereby the bandwidths which were provided by these dial-up modems were really, really small. So of the order of, few kbps. So it's 40 kbps, 50 kbps and so on. Then the first, I would say, major shift which happened in wired broadband access was DSL. So DSL started providing megabit speed. Then we had the further, revisions of DSL. We had, ADSL 2, ADSL 2++, and so on. While ADSL was being developed, some of the cable companies which were providing cable TV services in US and generally North America and Europe, they started looking at how can we provide broadband services over cable, because infrastructure was already there. So why not use the same copper cable to provide, broadband? The idea here is that the copper cable has a wide bandwidth. When you transmit voice over it, it only occupies 4 kilohertz, and the bandwidth of the copper cable runs into megahertz. So all that bandwidth is being unoccupied. So why not use the same? Similar idea was with DSL also, because voice channel was 4 kilohertz. In the cable case, the video channel is 8 megahertz, but you still have a lot of spare bandwidth on the cable. So some, work started on that area, and then new standard came out which allowed the cable TV companies to provide internet services over the same copper cable. In addition to that, PSTN, our old, telephone system, was also used to provide lease line services. So what is lease line is basically a dedicated internet access line which is running over your copper cable. So there is no voice there, it's basically a data connection over the copper cable. And then in recent years, we are seeing a lot of Ethernet deployment for access. So usually we use Ethernet in our LANs, but now many companies are offering Ethernet based services as an access connection. So instead of a DSL line running from your exchange to the home, there will be Ethernet line which will be running from your exchange to your home. So this is a new technology which is being deployed by many operators around the world to provide Ethernet over fiber or Ethernet over copper and so on. So we'll talk about Ethernet, we'll talk about DSL, cable, and briefly I'll talk about something which is called as broadband over power line, which is not used in India, but there is some interest in using it since power lines are anyway there. So the first technology we're going to look at is Ethernet. So Ethernet technology is fairly old. In fact, last week itself was the 40th anniversary of the first use of Ethernet cable. So 1973 is when Ethernet was invented. All the commercial uses started only in the 80s, and the standard itself was ratified only in 85. So the idea for Ethernet is fairly simple. The idea is that the packets which are coming from IP layer. So yesterday we looked at how the layering is done. So IP packets are given at the Ethernet. Ethernet creates what is known as frames. So IP packets are encapsulated into frames. In the frame you add two addresses, the Ethernet address of the source and the Ethernet address of the destination. And that is transmitted over a physical channel. The physical channel could be different. One common physical channel we see is the twisted pair cables that we use in our offices. Other physical channels may be fiber. It could be a copper line. and so on. So in the one important feature of Ethernet is that in the packet that you transmit, there is some additional information which is added to the packet, which allows the receiver to figure out whether the packets were correctly received or not. What I mean by correctly received is that you transmit a sequence of bits. Basically, it's a voltage signal, right? The voltage signal may get corrupted while transmission. So a bit which was transmitted 0 may become 1 because of some interference or some signal degradation. So this will cause error in the transmission. So suppose you transmitted 1, which is a sequence of 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, but somehow the 1 got flipped. So what we receive is 0. So basically the entire that bit is toggled. So to detect these errors, some additional information is included in the transmission. So at the receiver side, you run a check and figure out whether this is the actual bits which you are transmitted or not. So this way you can correct those errors. So there is something called forward error correction, by which at the receiver side you determine whether there is an error or not, and you apply an algorithm by which you can correct those errors. The other thing you could do is you could tell the transmitter that this packet was in error and I am not able to decode it, can you retransmit it? So both these features are there. So you can do some forward error correction at the receiver side, and you can also tell the transmitter that this packet was not correctly received, and the transmitter will retransmit for some, let's say 2-3 times. If it's not received after 2-3 times also, it will discard it. So forget about the packet. So maybe in that case, the higher layers can take care of it. For example, if TCP is being used, the TCP has its own reliable mechanism. So the end-to-end reliability is there, by which the receiver at the very end will tell the TCP transmitter that I received this packet did not come to me. So at different layers there are these kind of reliability mechanisms, but at the basic mechanism which is there at layer 2 or the Ethernet layer is that some error correction can be done, error checking can be done at least, and then error correction can be done if possible. If not, at least the transmitter can be told about it. So we distinguish between two types of so one way error correction can work is that some kind of feedback is coming from the receiver side, which tells the transmitter that this packet did not come. The second kind of error checking I can do is on each link. So when I transmit to this router tells me whether this packet was received or not. So this way I can avoid the delay, because if this will take some time to reach here, right? So this will take some time for the transmitter receiver to sense that something has gone wrong and tell the transmitter. And by the time it reaches the transmitter, then transmitter has to send another packet. So this whole exchange will take a long time. To avoid that, this long round trip, what you do is you enable some error checking at each link, by which if something goes wrong on this link, it can be immediately corrected here and then retransmitted. Similarly, the same kind of procedure can be done here. So by this link layer correction, I speed up the process of making sure that reliability is there, instead of waiting for the ultimate receiver to tell me whether something is wrong or not. So this way I can do faster error detection and correction. The other feature of Ethernet is that it is a broadcast protocol. So like I said, in wireless systems, when you transmit, everybody receives. So by definition, Ethernet is also a broadcast protocol. So when somebody transmits, all the stations which are connected to the transmitter will receive that. So inherently it is a bus-like system where any signal is received by all hosts. Then you look at what is the destination MAC address, and from there you decide whether this is for me or this is for somebody else. So at the interface will read the header and find out who is the destination. If I am not the destination, I will discard the packet. If I am the destination, I will receive the packet and pass it on to the higher layers. So because of this shared medium problem, what it creates is that if I am transmitting, somebody else may also be transmitting, and because they are using the same link, the two transmissions will collide and whatever is ultimately received is garbled. So what you need to do is, you need to maybe wait for a while and see if nobody else is transmitting. So if everybody is silent, then I start transmitting. So this is what is known as carrier sensing. So the idea is that a transmitter, before it actually sends a packet, will sense if there's some transmission is going on or not on the link, and if there's no transmission is going on, then only it will transmit. So this is what we call as carrier sensing. So basically you listen to the line for a bit, and if you find that the line is free for a certain period of time, then you start transmitting. But the problem which may arise is that if there are two nodes which are very far apart, let's say separated by a few hundred meters, then by the time the transmission of one node reaches other transmission, a long time would have elapsed. So if it is So if you imagine that in a, two nodes are situated by a long distance, but they are on the same Ethernet link. So this node starts transmitting a long packet, let's say like this. So this packet, because of the propagation delay, will take some time to reach here. Imagine that this packet is almost here, the first part of the packet, and because this user has not yet received any transmission, this has started maybe sometime t equal to 0, for example, this transmission started, and the propagation delay is some time, let's say tau. So this message will reach here only after time tau. So up to, from this point up to tau, there will be no signal on the line at here. So this transmitter may start transmitting while this was already transmitting. So this will create a collision. So what we can do is, to avoid that, is to disallow these long links. So this is one reason why Ethernet cables, if you see, they are rarely more than 100 meters, because if you make very long cables, then this kind of problem occurs where this channel is sensed to be free, but actually somebody had started transmitting somewhere else. By the time it reaches you, your signal gets garbled. So this is the carrier sense multiple access protocol. The other things about Ethernet is, when we started Ethernet, the first generation Ethernet was only supporting 10 Mbps, then we had 100 Mbps, then gigabit Ethernet came, now 10 Gbps Ethernet is supported, and new technologies are now supporting even higher rates of Ethernet. So how do you, work this in a real system? So what is done is, as I said, Ethernet defines a protocol for transmitting data, but that data can be transmitted over multiple types of physical channels. So what I mean by physical channels is that from your local, switching office, you may have a copper cable running to your house. So Ethernet can run over copper. It's basically a point-to-point connection. What I mean is that this is a single link for each subscriber. Similarly, you can run Ethernet over fiber. So you can have a fiber link from your local office which terminates at either in your office building or in your home or so on. The third case is where I run an Ethernet cable up to here, fiber cable, and then I can run another set of fiber cables to each subscriber. So in this case, I terminate the fiber here, but I may use some copper or something here. In this case, my fiber terminates here, and then I may have multiple fiber connections going outside. So there are many ways by which Ethernet can be, used in the ISP domain. Copper is the most common way right now. Fiber is coming everywhere, so fiber is the next, thing that over which carriers are trying to provide Ethernet services. Yeah. Yeah.
If it is fiber,
Yes.
and if it is copper, what is the distance limitation?
So basically, copper degrades around 1000, 1500 meters. The signal becomes really weak. If you are using copper, you cannot go beyond 2 kilometers, 1.5 kilometers.
No, but does the box denote a box on the curb, or the box is the exchange?
This is basically a local exchange, 1.5, 1.2 kilometers. Yes.
But if it is fiber,
Fiber can run for tens of kilometers. So,
there-
so there are many topologies here. I will talk about the fiber later.
What
Yeah.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
is, now consider that that box is the exchange.
Yeah.
Now, is it possible from the exchange, to the curb, you have a wide pipe,
Yeah.
and split the pipe up closer to the subscriber?
Exactly. So what you do is,
And can be done?
that can be done, yes. So for example, what you could do is, you can run either copper or fiber up to the curb, and from the curb, you can run another set of cables, which could be copper cables, Ethernet cables, or even you can use Wi-Fi.
And what I'm saying is, and do you need electricity at the point of splitting?
See, in this case, passive optical network, you don't need power here, but for all other cases, you need power. This is the only case where you don't need power for switching here. Network, this PON, you don't need power. But if you're using if you, for example, here you want to run fiber to individual homes, you will need power, because here you have to basically regenerate the signal. Because if it's a very long distance link from your distribution center to your local exchange, then you have to regenerate the signal. It would have become weaker. So you need power here.
For practical projects like this, if you have to carry on this discussion
Yeah.
with the local BSNL engineers, and to have some kind of thing, the kind of equipment, if you could actually say, this is the equipment, this is the manufacturer, this is the thing that will carry on these functions. I mean, I'm not talking about a theoretical class on what I'm talking about, an interface between that and an implementing thing. Because you will normally have an NGO or a thing, again discussing with BSNL. So, this knowledge that you are giving, that this is possible.
Yes.
And to be on the same frequency with those people.
Yes.
So can that be kind of emailed? I mean,
I can,
offline?
yeah, I can share with you.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
that I can share with you. So I will talk a little bit later about how fiber is distributed, but for now we can, think of it that the differences here is that in this case I am running a copper line from the local switch to every house. Similarly, for point-to-point over fiber, I have to run a fiber from this exchange to every house. Whereas in the optical PON case, what I am doing is I am doing a splitting here, and basically again fiber is running, but here there is no conversion here. Basically, in this case, I have to run a fiber from here to house. So a single fiber for each house or every subscriber. Here, one subscriber, multiple users are multiplexed. At this end, I will demultiplex. I will put a splitter here, which will split the connection to multiple houses. But in this case, basically it's end-to-end connection from my ISP to the home. So this gives you more scalable options, and also there is no need for any electrical power at this splitter, because it's just demultiplexing the optical signal itself. So that was briefly about Ethernet. I think after, in fact, before Ethernet, yes, DSL is the most commonly used wired broadband technology, and the basic idea is very simple. So as I said, your copper line on which your phones work, they have wider bandwidth than what is actually used by voice telephony. So voice telephony is only using 4 kilohertz, whereas your copper cable can carry much more bandwidth. So it can support bandwidth up to 30 megahertz and even I think more also, depending on what kind of cable you have. So since you are anyway have a cable running from exchange to your house, which is only using 4 kilohertz, why not use the same cable to provide data services also? So the challenge is, basically the challenge is that how do you multiplex the two signals? So what is done in DSL is that since the voice channel is anyway 4 kilohertz, you divide the entire channel into bunches of 4 kilohertz. So you create a number of channels, so maybe some 250 or 300 channels depending on how wide the bandwidth is. And on each, so one channel is reserved for voice, so you are not going to touch that. So that will always be at the lower end. So let's say 0 to 4000 hertz is dedicated to voice. Anything above can be used for data. So what DSL does is it divides the remaining chunk into a number of smaller channels, 4 kilohertz. On each channel, you decide whether this channel is good or bad, depending on what is the interference there, what is the frequency response. And then once you have figured out these are the good channels at this point of time, then you decide which of the channels you will use for data from the exchange to the user and which channels you will use data from the user to the exchange. So the upstream and downstream. So this kind of channel bonding is used. So you first chunk it and then you bond them together. So this allows you to create very wide bandwidths on the same telephone line on which you are using the carrying the voice. So DSL is using the higher frequency bands for data, the lower frequency band is used for voice. So in fact the way it is done is that the lowest edge is used for voice, that is 0 to 400, then comes the uplink data, that is data coming from user to the ISP, and then comes the downlink data, that is data coming from the service provider. So this way I split the entire available bandwidth into 3 chunks, and then I use the lower for voice and the higher for DSL. So the DSL has many variants, and we generally use the term XDSL for it, but the most commonly used variant is what is known as asymmetric DSL. So the reason it's called asymmetric is because uplink bandwidth is less than the downlink bandwidth. So you can give more on the downlink and less on the uplink. The idea was that at the time when DSL was implemented, most of the data usage was in the downstream. People were downloading stuff, there was very little upload going on. So there was no issue with using ADSL because you could still get on the upstream speeds up to 640 kbps. On the downstream, in fact, theoretically we say that 8 Mbps, but in practice at the distances that generally are used, we can get up to 1.5 Mbps in the downstream and about 640 kbps in the upstream. So like any other electromagnetic based technology, here also distance plays a big role. So as you move far away from the transmitter, your signal will decay. So the range at which you will get these speeds is limited. So in the case of ADSL, I think about 1 kilometer range from your local exchange, you will be able to get these kind of speeds, but at higher distances the speeds drop drastically. But you have newer variants of ADSL which are ADSL2, ADSL2 plus, which can give you much higher data rates. So the scheme is very simple, that at the ISP end, you have something called DSL aggregation module. So this, what it does is it will multiplex data coming to or coming from multiple users or going to multiple users. So this is the aggregator, and at the receiver side you have a DSL modem which we use. So the same cable which you used to run from your telephone exchange to your phone, now it is terminating at the DSLAM. So from DSLAM the cable runs up to your modem, but before it enters the modem there is a splitter here which splits the signal. So part of the bandwidth signal goes to the telephone and the remaining goes to the modem. So you have a filter here which filters out all the higher frequencies, gives a lower edge to the phone, whereas the modem takes the full signal and there it works on the higher edge of the signal. So very simple system, and we can basically use existing infrastructure to run this kind of connectivity for broadband. And from the DSLAM then you have fiber connections which will go to the, which will basically multiple DSLAMs will connect to some router where all this traffic is aggregated, and then this traffic goes to the internet core and then to other service providers. So this is the basic setup. So on the subscriber end, your modem could be connected to a router. So in that case, you can distribute the same link over multiple users, or the modem could be connected directly to a PC, in which case you can use the entire bandwidth for that PC. So I think good thing is that the DSLAM typically will support multiple types of DSL. So if your service provider wants to upgrade your DSL connection from ADSL to, let's say, ADSL plus 2, all the subscriber operator needs to do is to change the modem. Nothing needs to be changed on the line, no change on the DSLAM, only the subscriber end equipment will change. So it makes it very flexible to deploy newer versions of ADSL technology. So they are all backward compatible. Yeah. So router is basically an IP node, you can say. So what router does is that router will, you get one connection from so modem is always specific to a particular technology. So a different modem you will use for cable, different modem you will use for let's say DSL. So modem is basically what is basically modulator, demodulator, right? So the signal which is generated from DSLAM follows a particular protocol. So the way the bits are arranged, in what sequence they go, what kind of handshake is required before you start transmitting, that is defined as part of the DSL protocol. So what the modem does is, it takes those bits which are coming from the DSLAM, demultiplexes the data, demodulates it, so recovers the original signal which was transmitted by your end user. And then modem will basically give a IP packet to your router. So the router will work on the IP packet. Whereas on the phone line, you will have a raw electromagnetic signal, right? So you have some voltage pulses are coming. So modem will convert those voltage pulses into bits. And those bits then they are passed on to the router. So this is, you can assume that on this line, you have some L1, L2 connection running. So basically some, protocol is running, and here some conversion is happening. So this conversion will allow an IP packet to be generated, which is understood and received by all these parties. I cannot, if I wanted all these parties to use the DSL connection directly, then I will have to build the modem in each of these devices. So what the router does is, it allows the modem to share this connection over multiple links, right? So directly, if I could still connect a modem directly to a PC, but then I can only use it in that PC, because whatever is transmitted here is not understood by all these other guys. So what the modem will do is, it converts into a format in which it is understood by everybody else. And then, yeah. That is basically you have a Wi-Fi router. So in that case, your router will have a Wi-Fi basically access point or station inbuilt in it. So that will basically take the signal which is coming from the modem and distribute it or transmit over wireless link. The router here is using, in fact in this example also, this is a router which can support both. In fact most routers what you see, ADSL routers will have both the Wi-Fi connection as well as normal LAN connection. So you will see at least 3-4 LAN ports are there and some Wi-Fi ports are also there. So what the router will do is it will have a Wi-Fi access point which will, depending on which users are connected to Ethernet, which are connected to Wi-Fi, it will distribute the signal accordingly. So the router can have all this flexibility whereas modem cannot have. Modem, the basic function is basically convert the signal into a format in which it can be used by the devices which are connected to the router and the access point. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so you can aggregate them. This is a logical split, but you basically your hardware can have a modem as well as a router as well as Wi-Fi access point. So that is just from a manufacturer point of view, you can club them together into a single device. But inside the device, you will have this kind of connectivity where you can modem is connected to routing function and router will then distribute. But you can collapse them into a single box also. So another variant of DSL is very high bitrate DSL, which gives you much higher data rates compared to what is achieved as ADSL. But the problem here is that the length of the connection cannot be more than 300 meters. So if you go beyond 300 meters, the data rate drops drastically. So whereas in ADSL case, you could go up to at least 1.2 kilometers, 1.5 kilometers, but in the case of VDSL, you cannot go beyond more than 300. Yeah. So what happens is that, what we use, the signal that you transmit is transmitted the same power in both cases, whether you use ADSL or VDSL. But the way the signal is, modulated, that is different in the two cases. So what I mean is that in the ADSL case, a single sine wave, for example, may represent only 1 bit, right? Whereas in the VDSL case, there is a more complex modulation scheme by which, either by changing the amplitude or changing the phase of the signal, I can code more information in a single waveform. So at the receiver side, if it's a simple waveform, it's easier to decode because all you need to look is for amplitude, for example, if it is 0 or it is 1. Whereas when you modulate multiple signals, then you have to look for not just the amplitude, maybe also the phase, how it is shifted. You may have to also look at whether it is negative, positive, 0. So there are multiple levels maybe there, it may not be only binary. So different ways the modulation is done. So that will depend on, so now if I give you an example, the simplest case is where I transmit a waveform like this. So this represents 0 for me and this represents, let's say this represents 1 and this represents 0. So if there is no energy, I take it as 1. So 0, if there is energy in the pulse, I take it as 1. I can go more fine grained, I can put multiple levels, right? So I can say that this means 1 1, this means 1 0, this means 0 1 and this means 0 0, right? So it's the same power, but what I am doing is that I am dividing into smaller chunks. So at the receiver side, if it is this decision has to be made, then the margin of error is quite big. So even if I am somewhere here, I can still say it is 1, right? In the standard case. But in this, when you divide into 4 levels, you only have this much to work with. So if the error in the signal is this much, you can go wrong. So because of this kind of complexity in the decoder side, you will have issues whenever there is signal fluctuation. So if signal fluctuation, let's say, is like this, right? Your original signal was transmitted, let's say this. You will add on to this. In a binary signal, if the signal goes down by this, I can still infer that this is 1. But if you have multiple divisions here, a small change here can change what I perceive as the received bit or the set of bits. So because of that, you have, as you go, your signal will attenuate, and these attenuations will cause these kind of errors in the reception. So that's the reason why you will see, the performance will go down. So whenever you have this kind of error, then you have to retransmit, which means that the effective data rate will go down. it will be wrong data basically. Instead of 1 1, it may be decoded as 1 0. So something will be received, but that thing that's received is incorrect data basically. So just to give you a comparison of how these DSL variants stack up. So ADSL, maximum distance is about 5.4 kilometers actually, and at 5.4 kilometers you can get a capacity of 1.5 Mbps. Whereas the peak rate of DSL, which is 12 Mbps, is available only at up to 300 meters. But even at bigger distances, you can still get decent speed. So 5 kilometer is not much in a big city. So if you have an exchange, you will you very much quite likely that you will be at these distances from the local exchange. But ADSL2, for example, if you see, it gives you much higher speed, but the max distance is lesser. So you can go only up to 3.6 kilometer. If you go to VDSL, you have even lesser coverage. So you can go up to only 1.3 kilometers. So you will get about 13 Mbps there. So there is a correlation between these data rates that you can achieve and how far you can go. So this has to be taken into account when you are deciding what is your coverage area that you want to deploy your network at. Yes, so many cases when you apply for a DSL connection, your service provider will first come and check whether is it feasible to give you the rate that you plan that you wanted. So if you want 2 Mbps and you are too far away from the exchange, then he may not offer you 2 Mbps. So they do feasibility check before they give you the connection. Tariff right now, you see, one is the equipment may be different. So in that case, they may change the cost of your modem, for example. So there's extra cost in the installation of the setup. Tariff generally is independent of the bit rate, the technology. It depends on your data rate and what is the download limit, upload limit. But your modem cost will be different for VDSL compared to ADSL, for example. So your initial cost may be higher. Yeah, VDSL initial cost will be higher. Your modem cost will be different compared to ADSL modem. But ADSL to ADSL plus 2, I don't think there is much change. It's basically a software update. So it may not change the cost much, but VDSL may require a change of hardware itself. So that was about DSL. So the cable broadband is not used in India, at least I don't know if any service provider is providing it, but it's quite commonly used in North America, Europe and so on. And the idea is same as the idea for DSL. So in your cable TV transmissions, you again have a copper cable running from your distribution center to the home. And the copper cable is carrying video channels and it's not using the entire bandwidth which is available on the copper cable. So what you do is, whatever is the bandwidth which is free, you use that for data transmission. But the problem here is that unlike the DSL case where the telephone line is a bidirectional line, which means you are sending as well as receiving. But typically cable TV systems are unidirectional. Most of the times you are transmitting to the user, and the user is not sending any upstream data. So the system was designed as a mostly unidirectional system. So that provided one sort of bottleneck in the use of cable TV, and what it is, the way it is reflected is that typically the upstream speeds are much lower compared to the downstream speeds. Whereas in the DSL case, at least in symmetric DSL, you could provide the same data rate on both direction. But in cable standards, typically the downstream is a factor. If you see in this example, for example, DOCSIS 1.0, the first generation of cable broadband, 4 times more speed you can get on downlink compared to the uplink. So there is lesser bandwidth provided for the uplink connection than the downlink connection. So the system is again similar to the DSL case. What you have here is, so at the subscriber side you have a cable modem. So in the DSL case we have a DSL modem, now you have a cable modem. And at the head end where the distribution is, you have cable modem termination system. So like the DSLAM, you have the CMTS here which aggregates the connections from multiple subscribers, and then all these connections are then connected at the aggregation network of the operator. And this will go to the core network, and then this is the basic head end where the content is generated. So you may have TV services and you have IP services. So maybe video on demand and things like that, and you have the IP broadband services which are, but they are all carried over the same link up to this, in fact, up to the end. So only here you see some segregation where the TV services, cable, video services are coming from a different content system, and your IP services are coming from a different content system. But the same network is used from the core backbone up to the endpoint. So there is no other equipment required. So at the subscriber end, all you need is a cable modem. So you replace your, basically your cable modem will split the signal. One part will go to your, DTH receiver or whatever, so your, TV receiver. The other part will go to your router or your internet, wherever you are terminating. Both are copper. But the capacity of the copper line which carries your broadband cable signal is wider, because in the each channel itself is some 8 megahertz. At least in US it is 6 megahertz, and in Europe it's 8 megahertz. So the bandwidth you require to carry all those TV channels is much more. So you require, that copper cable that you require has more bandwidth in case of a cable TV system compared to a telephone line. So if you see the telephone line, typically very thin line, right? Whereas this is a thick copper line. So you can carry more bandwidth in a copper cable connection compared to a normal telephone connection. Because the system itself was designed for downlink transmission itself. So cable TV is basically one-way transmission. At the most, what you are doing is maybe some subscription related updates you are sending to the service provider. So at the distribution end itself, there is no provision made for sending data back to the head end, right? Your cable may carry data, but your CMTS, where your head end is, it is geared or tailored towards, you could, now you can, change it by providing more upstream capacity here in this side. So here, typically the upstream capacity is less, because you are not expecting the users to transmit, any channels or anything. So the system itself was designed in that way. But now newer, setups, they are closing the gap between upstream and downstream. But initial systems had this big gap. Yeah. So the way, one difference, so in fact this is what I was going to point out, that earlier cases you had, cable running long distances from your head end to the subscriber premises. But once you start using the entire bandwidth for data, what will happen is that you cannot give very high data rates to the users. So what has been replaced with that is what we call a hybrid fiber coax system. So from your distribution center to closer to the user, you put a fiber. So the fiber will carry over several kilometers the TV transmission as well as your broadband transmission. And from the closer to the home, you can run a copper cable. So that way you can multiplex a large number of channels on the fiber connection, and then you can distribute it at closer to the user. Yeah. 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 Yes, because you are converting the optical signal into electrical signal. So you will need power. Yes. That right now I cannot comment, but I can tell you how much power requirement is. Yeah, power is critical. Yeah, because you cannot run this connection, second connection. Yeah. So basically the internet services are terminating, coming on an optical connection up to the head end, and TV distribution, other things may be coming from a separate connection. Here they are aggregated and then distributed over fiber. And then at the closer to the subscriber, you can distribute it over basically your copper. And if the distances are very large from here to here, then you may need to put some amplifiers in between to regenerate the signal. So that also is there. So if you, yeah, definitely yes. So like DSL case, you could go 300 meters and you can get 30 Mbps and so on. So you can use copper at that length. So then we come to fiber. So fiber itself is basically a physical technology. It does not define any particular way of transmitting data. So you can run Ethernet over fiber, you can run, cable over fiber and so on. So all it provides is a very fat pipe. So on that fat pipe, you can multiplex all kind of connections. So you can run Ethernet over that. So there are multiple ways in which fiber is currently deployed. So one is what we call as fiber to the neighborhood, where you terminate the fiber in a street cabinet typically. So if you are serving a number of users along a street or row of houses, you will have a box which is sitting at the somewhere in the street, and from there you can use copper. So you can run copper lines from the street cabinet to each house. So typically this is an intermediate step towards when you move towards fiber to home. So you will first terminate your fiber connection at your street cabinet, and then from there initially you may have cable running. Later on you can replace with fiber to each home. So we also have what is known as FTTC, or fiber to the curb, in which case you are very close to the subscriber premises. So you basically typically within 300 meters. So you can run normal copper cable there. So no need for amplifiers or anything. So a single copper connection can be terminated from the curb to the basically subscriber's premises. And within the subscriber premises, for example, if it's an apartment building, you can use Ethernet or Wi-Fi or something to distribute the connection over multiple users. The next case is the fiber to the building, where you basically terminate the fiber in the basement of a building or the house. So in which case you are very close to the subscriber itself. So you can use Ethernet directly there, because you are right at the basement. And Ethernet cables can be run over tens of meters. So you can distribute the fiber connection within the building using Ethernet, or copper also is there. But yeah, typically Ethernet is cheaper compared to copper connections. And then fiber to the home is also now being provided. In fact, BSNL is now providing fiber to home, where you terminate the fiber inside your house. It's like a DSL connection. You have a termination point inside your home, and from there you can use Wi-Fi or you can use other technologies to distribute. And fiber to the desktop is more rare right now, where basically you connect your terminal or some PC directly to the fiber connection. So the differences are like this. So basically you have one case where you are running one fiber individually from the exchange to each subscriber. Second case is where I have one fiber from exchange to a local point, where I am multiplexing data for multiple users on the same fiber, and then here I am doing the splitting. This is a passive splitter. In that case, it does not require power. So basically at this I can split and then distribute over fiber again to multiple users. The last case is what is known, even a simpler case, where for each user I am giving different bandwidth. So basically there is one stream of light which is for each user. So you can see different colors correspond to different users. In this case what I am doing is, in time domain I am multiplexing. So let's say 1 second, one user, from 0 to 1, one user, 1 to 2 another user. So I am doing a time division multiplexing here, whereas here I am doing frequency division multiplexing. So a different color light for each user in the same fiber. So imagine I have a bunch of fibers running in a cable. Each fiber is dedicated to one user, and here I just need to figure out which user is which color. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Cost is one thing, because this kind of passive optical networks are fairly new. They are 3-4 years old only. So right now the equipment is costly. Yeah, the equipment is costly. So it's not so The other point is that although power is not required, but you are sharing the bandwidth over multiple users here. So the capacity per user is less compared to this connection, where each user is getting its own fiber connection essentially. It's basically a virtual end-to-end pipe from here to here. Like this is also a almost end-to-end pipe. Whereas in this case, it's not an end-to-end pipe. This link is shared over multiple users in time domain. So effective rate you get at each user will be less. So there is a drawback here also. So then you see, basically scaling then makes, if a large number of users are here, if fewer users are here, it's okay. But as the number of users increases, the per user share will go down. So that is what so basically this is, scaling becomes a problem. WDM PON is, yes, it's very mature technology. So it's not very widely deployed, still testing going on. So this will take some more time. But this way has a lot of benefits because first of all, at the central switch itself, I don't need to terminate all these cables. I only need one cable connection, right? And the user side also, I'm getting basically a end-to-end fiber connection. So I get much more bandwidth. And for each user, I have a dedicated connection. So there's no sharing as such. So I can independently upgrade the connection of each user without affecting anybody else, which was not possible here because the same shared pipe. So if I give somebody more, then somebody else has to suffer. So these two are already deployed. This has been deployed for a long time. This TDM PON is a fairly newer, in the sense maybe a few years old. WDM PON is not even standardized. There are many proprietary implementations are there. So it's still quite immature connection, but the people say there's a lot of potential to use this kind of thing. So BSNL is, for example, using TDM PON, is also using this kind of connections, but they are using PON connections for their FTTH deployment. So this, yeah, this schematic shows how where you split the use copper and where you use fiber. So in the case of fiber to neighborhood, your cable connection will be more than 300 meters long. So your fiber terminates somewhere here, and then you have long cable connections which run into the buildings. In the curb case, basically the cable connection will be running only 300 meter or less. So you can get VDSL, for example, quite easily in this case. You may not be able to achieve VDSL speeds here, but here you can use VDSL. In the basement case, you can use Ethernet itself. And this, of course, is right at the home, so you can use Wi-Fi, you can use other access technologies also for distribution. So the cost, varies according to how much copper you are using and what kind of termination equipment you require when you convert from copper to cable. So this is what I was talking about, passive optical networks. Basically, they will give you a single shared fiber, which is then split at the closer to the subscriber base. And there is no, the only power you require is at the two endpoints. So in this case, when I am running this kind of scheme, here I need power, but when I go to the end user, then only the endpoints I will need power. So in between, I don't need power. So this is one simple example where you see that from the starting point, I have two fibers running, one to one set of subscribers, one to another set of subscribers. Closer to the subscriber, I have this splitter which can split into multiple connections. So currently, these splitters are supporting 32 up to 64, I think, connections. You cannot go beyond more. So there is an inherent limit in how much you can scale in terms of number of users here. So,
when you say split to a certain number, what is the whatever the bit rate
that is decided by what is the bit rate here.
No.
Yeah.
If you're getting 256 or 512, or what is the speed you're getting? 2 Mbps per second, what is it?
No, this link itself is running into 10 Gbps and more than that. So if you have 10 users here, each can get 1 Gbps. So that is, the bottleneck is this link, not this link, because this is individual fiber link more or less. So there is no bottleneck here, the bottleneck is here. So how fat your pipe is here, that will decide what each user will get on this end in this passive optical network case. So the shared connection is where the bottleneck is. So what you do is you distribute the connection to, so you can, in this case what you are doing is you are splitting it, and at the termination end, that this will decide, it will take out A, this termination will take out B, and maybe some video stream is there, similarly in the other case. So the actual power is required here and here, not in this splitter. Yeah. No, inside also there will be, so there are different types of fibers. You may have a single mode fiber, you have multi-mode fiber. So, yeah. Yes. Yes.
So you actually within the 6-pair you will have with a wider diameter, or what is it?
Not really. So what you have is how many fibers you are lighting actually. That's what decides. So your fiber may have multiple fibers actually inside. It's not a single fiber connection. You can increase, yes.
That is fatness, or
How many fibers are lit? That decides how much capacity is available. That is the fatness. Yes.
it is not really that the fiber itself becomes fat.
No. Just how many fibers are lit. So that's why fiber is very flexible, that you can deploy fiber now and 10 years later all you need is to light up a new fiber inside the same cable. So there is no extra digging or anything to do. So I may dump the fiber today and I may use it 10 years, increase the capacity to whatever I want. Yeah. Yes. I don't know how easy is that. I think it will be very difficult. Because there is a further encapsulation in the fiber. So there is an outer layer and then there is an inner layer. Yeah. Yes. Oh, you mean an extra cable you want to? Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yes. 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 Pull it, yes. Yeah, this is the point, that the data rate of the link is limited by the terminal equipment and the fiber itself. So if you have more optical transmitters at the transmitter side, you can light more fibers. So for each fiber which is lit, I need to have a transmitter unit. Similarly, I need to have a receiver unit. So basically the limitation on the fatness of the pipe is from the end equipment, not from the fiber itself.
Most cable televisions are going on that. So, and then theft is virtually, it has zero value, like copper has a resale value. But fiber, unless a specialized people use it, you can't melt it and you can't do anything with it. So between these two routings, why have service providers not used an optical, an aerial routing for fiber, which is, the deployment is faster, and if you are putting it on a 33 kV line, virtually nobody will climb up to that line to steal it. So,
but then it's also an issue of access, whether the...
No, what are the factors? I want to know that.
So I'm not sure why they don't do it on power lines. I think from a technical point of view, there should not be an issue because there's no interference or anything from power lines to optical lines. I think one reason I feel maybe is that the electricity boards, you have to negotiate with each electricity board to lay fiber in each place. Then other thing is you have to put equipment also, because unlike what you have to do is the signal will get weak, so you have to put regenerators. So the poles itself you have to put some active equipment, which the electricity board may not allow you to do it. In this case you are putting it below the ground, so nobody is bothered about it. It's already grounded, and So one reason I could think of is because it is it requires electrical units in between to regenerate the light. So you may need to have extra equipment deployed on each. Yes.
Also another reason is that like copper wires which can just be replaced, if fiber wire is broken, then it needs to be spliced and it's a long process then.
There's a chance of it getting broken.
Yeah, that way there's less chance to get it cut than when you put in the ground, somebody digs a trench and the fiber is cut. So that way it is would be easier to maintain than a normal underground connection. So I'm not really aware why they chose this method, but intuitively it looks okay, but I don't know what is the politics behind that. So finally, just a quick look at broadband over power line. So this has been idea has been around for a long time, from 60s onwards. Why not use the same cable which is giving you power transmission to transmit broadband signals also. So there's a lot of research, in fact some trial deployments also in place. The idea is very simple, that you inject your, suppose your fiber is terminating somewhere here and you inject the electrical signal at the pole, which is somewhere where you have the medium voltage line, and from there it goes to the near the house, and then from the house you can run some other wiring In fact, it terminates in your power socket itself. From there you can draw. You have a special modem which is power line modem which will convert it into an IP transmission. So this has been around for a very long time, but there are two issues here. One is the amount of bandwidth available is less, and second is the interference can be quite large. Electrical signals, both your broadband signal as well as the power signal are both electrical signals, so they will interfere with each other. So that has some issues on how much bandwidth you can get in these kind of situations when you are using power line over broadband. So at least in India, so far there is no regulatory approval for this kind of thing. But in some Western countries, some trials have been going on using this BPL for broadband access. But there is no real commercial deployment for these kind of things on a large scale. Finally, a big chart, I don't know if you are able to see it, but I will share it with you. So basically what is the, when you are choosing one of these technologies, what are the pros and cons? So as I said, the coaxial cable connection, or HFC, basically using the existing TV networks. So you have no new infrastructure to deploy. Only thing is you have to provide the user with a cable modem. But you have limited bandwidth per channel because the channel size is fixed. So in the cable TV case, each channel is either 6 megahertz or 8 megahertz. So you can only give that much to a user. So that is one limitation. And the cable itself is shared over multiple users. So it cannot scale too much. Unlike a DSL case where there is a single line from the exchange to the user, in the cable case, the distribution is in a broadcast kind of mode. The same channels are being received by everyone. So same cable is being shared by multiple users. And you have typically asymmetric connection, which means the downstream data rate is more than the upstream data rate. ADSL also is using existing infrastructure only, but it can give you much higher data rates, but it's very distance sensitive, of course. Same is also true for cable. But again, this asymmetric nature is there for cable DSL also. VDSL can give you much higher data rates, but the distance coverage is much less compared to ADSL. ADSL plus 2 is basically an extension of ADSL, which can give you much higher data rates in the uplink connection. So upstream connection, you can go much higher compared to ADSL. But again, this is also bandwidth sensitive. Broadband over power line is, right now it is quite expensive. And also, there is interference with other transmissions. Fiber to home is the most promising technology right now. But, you have to basically lay out new infrastructure to provide fiber compared to DSL or, cable and so on. So that way, you have basically unlimited bandwidth, but termination equipment is expensive. Plus, you have to lay out fibers, which fiber itself is not expensive, but to lay out the fiber is quite a tedious process, and you need right of way. And if fiber gets cut, then you are in trouble. But otherwise, most service providers are now starting to provide fiber connectivity to home also. So at least in India, many service providers are now giving FTTH access. So I think I will stop here, take a few questions before we break. So I think there is a lecture on NOFN sometime tomorrow, day after. So what the government plan is to have fiber up to every panchayat. I think that is the promised objective of the NOFN plan. If that kind of setup is available, then all you need to do is to either run copper from the NOFN termination point, or you use some Ethernet or Wi-Fi when this can be used. So that way, NOFN can change, at the last mile, you have a lot more options, cost-effective options compared to the current situation where, particularly in rural areas where distances can be large from exchange to the subscriber premises. So you have less choice in terms of what technology you can use. But if optical fiber is terminated at the panchayat level, then you have a lot more flexibility on both wired as well as wireless technologies which you could use to distribute and reach the end user point.
In theory, it is possible to send more than one signal through a fiber cable, I would assume.
Yes, you can multiplex. Yes. One signal means what? For one user or?
For many services. Right?
Yes, yeah, you can multiplex, yes.
There could be a possibility for supposing something like a DSL or and other value-added services to go through one single cable.
No, DSL is a particular technology. So DSL is used over your copper cables, basically, right? It's designed for that. You can run Ethernet over fiber, for example. Ethernet, yes.
So right now, the system that we are running in there, there's a different provider for cable TV, there's a different provider for, say, internet.
Yeah.
But it could have actually been combined by in a single package as well.
Yeah. I think that kind of is basically an operator's prerogative. If they want, they can bundle the connection. Yes.
In a single cable.
Not a single cable, because cable broadband is using the copper cable. DSL is also using the telephone cable. So physical medium is different. But what fiber allows you is you can multiplex, video transmission, voice, data, everything. So your triple play or quad play can be on a single fiber, which is not possible at least in DSL, for example. ADSL bandwidth is not enough to provide you with HDTV, A plus, Y plus data, and so on. Whereas on fiber, you can run all these services on the same connection. So fiber gives you that flexibility, which is not there in ADSL, for example, or even cable. Yeah.
So, suppose Reliance is planning 4G next year, or what they've declared. So they also need to have a optical fiber network to support the 4G services. How does that?
Yes. So basically, what you have is, if you look at the architecture, so like in this case, you have at this point your data from the user is aggregated, right, at the DSLAM. The DSLAM will join some other aggregation router somewhere where multiple DSLAM connections will terminate. And from there you have to run fiber to your network where you will do content provisioning, you will do, pass it to other users also, other networks also. So it will pass through your core network. So this is what is known as the backhaul links. So whether you are a wireless service provider or a wired service provider, you will have this aggregation and backbone networks where you will need to have a lot of fiber by which you can backhaul all this data which is coming from access. So what Reliance is doing is it is tying up with Airtel and Reliance Communications to lease their fiber capacity, because they have a lot of fiber lying around which they don't use. So they are leasing their capacity to RIL to use for this kind of backhauling connections. So most of the service providers who have deployed fiber, they have excess capacity. So they are trying to offload to other users.
But when you say backhaul, and the fact is that they also have to give data on this side. So virtually it will be two-way use of that particular fiber.
Yeah, it's two-way.
Why do you call it backhaul?
No, backhaul means that this is at the back end of the network. Nothing to do with direction.
Haul is two-way.
Yeah, haul is two-way.
The back part relates to.
Because it is the back end. So we have access, we have the back end.
The haul is two-way.
Yeah, it is two ways. Yes, it is two-way. But you basically, you are connecting your access segment to your core segment, and that is the back end connection. Yeah.
Sorry, so the 4G will come where tier 2 and tier 3 networks connect to the internet.
No, so from yesterday I had one slide which. Basically what you will have is the 4G connection for Reliance comes here. So this will be basically another access segment, like you have fiber, you have copper, you have cable. 4G will be another access segment, which will be directly terminating at the user end. Then somewhere you have the aggregation of 4G. So data from So in each city you may have different aggregation points, and that is backhaul to your, so basically this is your one aggregation where, for example, if Reliance is running both radio and cable, all the data will terminate at some aggregation point. It will be backhaul to the Reliance core network.